Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Reflexology Exchange, the place where we support reflexologists, holistic therapists, and wellness practitioners to grow not only in skill, but in well-being and resilience too. Today, I'm excited to welcome Gaby Cabrera-Kimchi, a functional medicine practitioner and integrative health coach, whose work is all about helping people reclaim energy, restore balance, and live in a way that supports deep, sustained well-being. Gabby knows firsthand what chronic stress and burnout feel like and brings a holistic, science backed approach that combines nutrition, lifestyle, thought awareness, and functional help to help people thrive instead of just survive. For many reflexologists and holistic practitioners, burnout isn't just feeling tired. It shows up as emotional exhaustion, loss of joy in practice, overwhelm around business and boundaries, and a sense of giving more than we're able to replenish. Today, we'll explore what burnout really is, how it shows up in our bodies and nervous systems, and practical, nourishing ways to prevent it, so you can continue holding space for others without losing yourself in the process. So grab a drink, take a deep breath, and let's dive into how we can support our well-being while serving our clients with heart and skill. Gabby, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's such an honor to be here, spending my time with you, Meg.
Well, it's an honor to have you, honestly. So, Gabby, I start the podcast with the same question that I ask all guests, which is that usually reflexologists come to reflexology after a big life event or change. I know I certainly did. What's been that big life event or change that has led you to where you are today?
It was burnout, believe it or not. And I think for a lot of us healers out there, there is something that changes that just makes you see the world in a different way. It makes you, just be a little bit more aware about like those automatic responses that we have to everyday stressors. And yeah, it's for me, I like to call my burnout a crisis of my soul, basically, because it was felt in every single aspect of my living, not just physiological symptoms, but also I had a bit of an identity crisis after becoming a mom. And I realized that that was basically the trigger for all of these things that had been accumulating in my body.
Thank you for sharing that. And I also, in the spirit of vulnerability, I also experienced burnout before. So I know what it feels like for me. I'd love to know what it looked at like for you specifically, but also how you would define burnout, because I think it might appear differently in different people.
Mm. Yeah, so the way I like to think about it is basically when demand exceeds capacity, so the body's capacity to hold stuff. And whilst this is true for every human being, men and women, for women, our capacity also shifts throughout life stages and cycles and throughout the month. And so it's not as an easy an equation, I would say. So demand seems to be constant whilst capacity in women changes. And in my case, for example, postpartum was a particularly vulnerable phase, obviously, that I guess I was under resourced, but it was the accumulation of all of these things that had been brewing inside of me that finally were triggered by the postpartum sort of low hormonal output that is normal, that made it hard for my body to sort of bounce back.
And I think that there's a really good quote from a man called Peter Crone where he says that women are incredibly resilient, but sometimes resilience can go into tolerance. And I
Love
think
that.
that our tolerance and our ability to tolerate high workload, demands from other people can in itself lead to burnout. I know that
Mm.
I've had two bouts, maybe not really bad bouts of burnout, but two bouts of burnout. One when I was working in the corporate world, and then one when I had my third child and my mother-in-law died shortly after. And it was like that kind of emotional burnout with my third child. But with my second, after I had my second and I went back to work, it was like the demands of clients, travel, exhaustion, and all these things that were going on physically that my body physically couldn't do it. So I think I definitely think it can show up differently in different people. And with that in mind, what's kind of the early signs of burnout that people should look out for?
So fatigue, just like not feeling like yourself, that a lot of my clients come to me and they just can't put their finger on it. And they just don't feel like themselves and they just cannot name what it is, but it's harder to come back from things. So things like, your workouts that you normally do, if it's suddenly taking you longer to recover, that would be an early sign of that system, that balance between demand and capacity being a little bit more tipped against. So when we look at that demand capacity equation, well, demand is everything that the environment is creating, workload, life load, family load, caregiving load. And then capacity is your terrain. How well resourced are you? Are you eating balanced meals? Is your blood sugar stable? Is your nervous system more responsive rather than reactive? How are your hormones, your sex hormones? Are they balanced? Are they not balanced? How's your sleep? Are you actually recovering and regenerating? So for certain, and when we kind of look at the physiology of women and also how stress kind of impacts women differently, women have a nervous system that I like to refer to as more plastic, meaning that we were designed this way to kind of be more sensitive to the inputs from the outside world and the inside world, because basically those are the two sources of information for the nervous system. And we actually have more sensitivity at cell receptor site for stress hormones. So that is what makes us more sensitive. There is an actual physiological explanation to that. And that's probably what Peter Crone refers to as being more, we take more in. It's because our nervous systems were designed that way. And when you think about it, I like to think of it as a gift because basically that's what makes us be the healers of society, but we need to be really well resourced in order to help others, basically. So that is the awareness piece, right? It's like, yes, we can do all these things, but we also need to really take a good look inside, and we can only help from a place of strength.
It's a tricky one with reflexologists, with healers, with wellness practitioners, because first of all, unique to us, I suppose, like we're on our feet a lot, we're caring for others a lot. We might be taking on other people's issues or concerns, especially for reflexology, because we're face to face with the client more
Mm,
often than not, rather than a traditional back massage where you're not looking at your therapist or your healer.
mm,
There is definitely an inclination for the client to talk to us,
mm.
and I think sometimes people do take on, or reflexologists can take on, the issues that are going on and want to really help and heal and fix. Are there any unique burnout risks specifically for reflexologists or practitioners in this sort of line of work who are seeing clients all the time, taking on other people's issues? I can imagine that your line of work is quite probably relate to this. Are there unique burnout risks for people in this space?
So I mean, I think for reflexologists, because I only see people online, yes, I take on a lot as well. But I think for you guys, the actual act of being there physically, holding space for people would probably be another load. A lot of us are also independent, employees. So, we're self-employed. So there would be also the financial side of things as well. So I would say those three risks, sort of the physiological, emotional, and perhaps financial stability, would be some of those burdens that would be different for that.
And I'd say another one is healers, helpers, empaths
Mm,
can sometimes fall into people pleasing tendencies, which can mean that we enjoy helping others. And like I said before, that resilience turns into tolerance because actually our feeling of success is based on other people's
mm,
success rather than our own. And once we're doing that again and again and again, that's what can cause this sort of chronic burnout that we don't even realize is happening. How does chronic burnout affect the nervous system if we ignore those early signs? So those early signs of fatigue, those early signs of
mm.
not really listening to our body. How can that affect our nervous system and overall health?
So I see it as a spectrum, right? So first of all, let's kind of stop giving stress a bad rap. Stress is good. If we didn't have stress hormones, we wouldn't wake up. Plain and simple. Stress is also what makes us become stronger. It's through exposure to stressors that the body then adapts, recovers, and kind of comes out stronger on the other side. But let's remember that sequence: stress, recovery, hormesis, right? Adaptation. A lot of us never allow time for that recovery to take place. And so it's in that, I think, um, gap that our biggest opportunity lies. And that is probably what makes the difference between chronic stress burnout or stress being your friends and you kind of harnessing that stimulus to become stronger on the other side. And so for me, it's how resourced are you when you encounter stress? How resourced are you from a physiological terrain perspective? So going back to those basics, food, sleep, movement, relationships, connection, purpose, which are the 5 pillars of my method. And then the emotional side of things needs to have some awareness around what your triggers might be, what your personality traits are, right? Like a lot of us healers and helpers, again, we're people pleasers and we probably burnt out or had some health crisis ourselves. And that's what made us change our lives. And so I recognize in me that I have the burnouts, people pleasing tendency. And also I'm a perfectionist, which is a perfect storm. It can create a perfect storm for me. So I need to get very clear around boundaries and with my clients, with my family, with my friends, with my schedule. And I use, certain tools like kind of understanding my menstrual cycle capacity, knowing that at certain times of the month, I do require more rest and more time to myself, and I'm less tolerant of certain things. I also use wearables like the Aura ring, which tells me how stressed I am, how well I've recovered. And I try as much as I can to kind of align my activities to that kind of capacity, the capacity that I'm kind of currently endowed with. So I think we need to differentiate between good stress and bad stress. And the chronic stress is the one that just keeps on going without us having the ability to kind of replenish, recover, come back out stronger. So that's what I like to demystify and basically tell people if we resource ourselves through doing all these wonderful things, inside and out, the way that stress will affect us will be very, very different. Because although we cannot control the stressor, we will be able to have a more healthy relationship with stress and a better response that's going to have less repercussions for our health long term.
I love the reframe of stress because stress has become sort of
Mm,
negative connotation. But you're right. If we didn't have that sort of cortisol, we wouldn't be getting up and out in the morning. We wouldn't be building our business. We wouldn't be able to treat our clients. So almost reframing the word stress to activity, to stimulation, to
yep.
activation, maybe even. If you're activated by something, then how quickly can you recover from it?
Hmm.
I think it's a really interesting one. For me, I know what my trigger is that I have this ingrained narrative that I do everything and then I rest.
Huh.
So there's probably something from childhood without
Mm,
getting to psychiatrists about it, where I was taught that you do everything and then at the end of the day
yep.
you kind of
You have
collapse.
to earn your rest, which I think is a very common thing in society. Yeah.
Yeah. So now it is very unnatural for me, but in the day I take like a 15-minute rest and it's been really, really hard. But I think that has helped my body to realize that recovery and rest is actually a good thing. But I
Mm,
also know that practitioners do feel guilty from stepping back. Would you be able to say, yes, I can have a client here, but no, dear client, I'm going to say no because I need that 30-minute break before my next one. Otherwise, I'm back to
mm.
back. So, how can we reframe self care as essential rather than indulgent in a society that kind of sees self care as sort of lighting a candle and taking a bubble bath?
Basically, coming back to having to earn rest, the way I like to reframe it for my high performers is we get stronger when we rest. The only way the body can adapt and be stronger, like I mentioned before, like stimulus, recovery, hormesis, i.e., getting stronger, physiologically, that is the only way we can actually be better at what we do. And so self care is really about being more capable and increasing your capacity to stress so that you can show up as a better person, healer, parent, human being, fill in the blank. When we're a better resource, we act better, we know better, we have more bandwidth, we respond better to stress. And it is, a repetitive sort of cycle, and it's one that compounds. So if you sleep better, you show up more resource the next day. When you don't, you know it. And so I guess in those situations, obviously life is not perfect. And if we could, we would all, use all of these wonderful things that we know about. But something as small as a physiological sigh can really reset your nervous system before you are going in to see a new client. And you should do that because you should recalibrate that nervous system and tell it there isn't a lion to run away from. Just like we charge our phones constantly, we need to charge our batteries. And so a lot of us are suffering with things like chronic insomnia and thinking that the problem is the sleep, but the sort of sleep is just a sign of a dysregulated nervous system that we have to regulate in the day when we have control. And so things as small as starting your day with breakfast and a little bit of light and, a sad lamp in the winter can reset that circadian rhythm so that you show up stronger. Avoiding social media and instant gratification in the morning can help your dopamine levels so that your natural dopamine can kind of carry you through the day. And so you're less likely to suffer those kind of energy slumps in the afternoon. And all of it comes back to how resourced for the next thing that's kind of coming your way. But you have to become, I think, super intentional about creating small pockets of recharge throughout the day. Just like we eat snacks constantly, I think we should be snacking on nervous system regulation to carry us through our days.
I love that. I think that's a really good line for people. I also love what you said about social media because
Mm,
as practitioners, we are building a business and usually people are on Facebook or Instagram, or they might have a website, but there is that sort of, especially on social media, that sort of dopamine hit of reaching out to get clients and a perception of ourselves on social media that we want to sell,
mm,
which is part of the problem of creating a perception of ourselves that might not be the reality. What you said about social media is really important in the morning. I have noticed if I turn on my phone early or like first thing, I can feel it in my body, right? Like there's that sense of wanting to reach for my phone more. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
mm.
What are those boundaries that we can put around social media use? And then I'd love to talk with you about other boundaries after that.
Yeah. So basically, what's happening to our brains when first thing in the morning, when they're so malleable and kind of ready to take on the day, highly influenceable as well. The first thing that we serve it is some instant gratification from social media, is it then expects to kind of have that same level of gratification from the rest of your day. So you can imagine that after that, everything feels flat because, seeing people in real life, not as exciting as getting another follower on social media. And I was reading a book by TJ Power, who's a neuroscientist and talks about this. And he was saying how our ancestors had to work 4 hours to get the equivalent amount of dopamine that we now get through 15 minutes scrolling on our phone. So whatever goes up in the body has to come down. And so when we have such an extreme reaction to we're kind of getting flooded with it, then the body says that's too much and, kind of brings it back down. And it's in that drop that just like when you eat a sugary, carby breakfast, that goes up and then that goes down. The next thing you feel is rubbish. And you're going to want to go and grab the thing again that you're not supposed to, a croissant mid morning, because you're hungry again. And it's going to give you that hit. The same happens with social media. And so then the other thing is that it really exacerbates that negativity bias. We're kind of wired to feel that, things aren't enough and that we need to be trying harder. And so when we're constantly kind of on it, we feel that what we're doing is not enough. So it really erodes our purpose, which is such a massive shame, really, because purpose is what drives motivation in humans. And we often think that motivation is something that is just there and we need to kind of run and reach it and grab it. But actually, it's feeling on purpose, it's creating dopamine hits, but the hard way, kind of like doing your bed in the morning, washing your dishes and cleaning up after yourself, making your room look like, like place you'd kind of want to go and hang out in. It's those things that feel really like boring that actually give you the right dopamine levels that make you want to then feel you feel motivated. And then you're like, right, what do I do now? Like maybe I can go and, you know, do that pitch that I was putting off or make that call. You feel braver, you feel motivated, you feel like you can go and do hard things, which is not what happens when you get junk dopamine because you just kind of, your brain then starts to look for the easy kind of thing. which is the phone again, or maybe a sugary hit or something like that.
I love this because rightly so, our government currently is debating about whether
Mm,
social media should be around for under 16s. And yet, reflexologists usually are of a certain age group, and we can still make sure that we're thinking about how it's impacting us.
mm,
So, would you say then within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking up, not having the phone on, not getting that automatic hit, that sort of junk food hit, and
yep.
just allowing your body and your brain to wake up slowly?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can be even more intentional and just kind of the way I like to see it is, I am also a solopreneur and I depend on things like Instagram to promote my business. But I create now windows of Instagram, not just, oh, when I'm bored. And it's, you know, I don't know, I need to have done X amount of things before I give myself the kind of gratification of Instagram. And then it needs to be within a time limit. Obviously, it's like, right, I'm going to do that now. I'm going to post, I'm going to reply to comments, or I'm just going to doom scroll, which is also fine. I also kind of recognize it as something that when I'm maybe feeling low, I'm doing more of. And if I allow myself permission to do that with rules, then I'm like, fine, I've had my hit. I can walk away from it. So I would say put it off as much as you can, kind of try to do some light movements, replenish your body, intention setting for the day. So before your mind is hijacked by someone else's agenda, why don't you take the advantage of those amazing hours in the morning when your brain is primed to kind of take on the day and actually set out an intention for what you want your day to look like before someone else takes over?
I love this because it's these small little changes that people can make that can make a really big difference. I do know someone who said to me recently, I don't see how small changes can make a big difference to me. And I use the example, which is what I use to a lot of reflexologists in my CPD courses, which is if I told you to smoke a cigarette every day for 50 days, you'd probably start to feel worse. So we know incremental bad choices, but why can't that be the other way around for good choices? So we've
Mm,
just spoken about even just delaying picking up your phone in the
hmm.
morning as an incrementally good choice that's going to support your nervous system. You talk about these sort of mind body choices. How can practitioners build these small sustainable habits to protect their energy over time
Yeah.
alongside the phone?
So I think protecting your morning energy, if because giving people a long list to do sometimes is overwhelming, and I get it. If we kind of have to start really small, then, forget about the rest of the day. Why don't we start with a really strong day? Because I do believe how you kind of start the day sets the tone for the rest of your day and how it will pan out. And that has a sort of biological, biochemical meaning behind it. It's basically when the master switch goes on and tells the body, right, from now on, this is what's going to happen for the rest of the day. So you have an influence on how, hard those cravings are going to hit at 3 p.m. by how you choose to kind of eat in the morning. And the same happens to dopamine. Dopamine tends to go up in the morning with cortisol and then naturally comes down because obviously then all of the wonderful calming neurotransmitters need to come in to calm the brain. And so if we start our day really strong, we make things easier for us in this sort of afternoon, evening when things tend to get busier, picking up kids from school, cooking meals. We've had a rough day and then we tend to kind of go for our poison of choice, whether it's Netflix, sugar, wine, whatever it is, not judging. It's just, human instinct to kind of want to feel better. But when we start that day stronger, we're kind of setting the scene for success, right? So it can be something as small as making sure that you're hitting your protein targets in the morning, that you're hydrating before coffee, that you're doing some light movement to get, lymph flowing and to wake the body up. This can all help your cortisol levels, that is going to help your dopamine levels, that's going to make you feel like it's easier to do things. I do believe that a lot of the mental health crisis that we're experiencing comes from, you know, the kind of onslaught of stimulation that we're receiving from it's just too much for the body and the brain to take. So a lot of it is about paring things back and really taking it back to basics.
And for those out there, including myself, who might have young kids or
Mm.
kids who are dependent on them,
Mhm.
because they don't have to be young to depend on you still, that can sound like, "Oh, but Gabby, like, I've got 3 young kids and one still sleeps in the bed with me, and, like, I come downstairs and I immediately empty the dishwasher and I've got 3 different breakfasts to make." I'm talking about myself here.
Mm.
There's still pockets, and I think that's the thing, is that I now make myself this, like, special drink in the morning before I have a coffee or anything else, and that's my ritual that
Yep.
I have in the morning that works for me. I put on certain music in the morning, I stretch, and it sounds so minor, but it makes such a big difference to
Mhm.
me, and I've noticed it over time. So, yes, we might have dependents in the house or we might be rushing out the house, but is it just one thing that you can do in the morning that can have a huge impact, I think, make a big deal. Gabby, you are also a specialist in perimenopause and menopausal health and hormonal health in general. This is very much geared towards female reflexologists. I have to make sure that it's said that there's many amazing male reflexologists out there, but this is much more geared towards females. And therefore, can you talk about perimenopause and menopause? Because that's kind of number one, the age group that most reflexologists fall into by and large. Number one, and number two, menopause seems to be the thing that is of most interest to clients as well. So we're kind of
Mhm.
experiencing these hormonal shifts while trying to help others. What is going on hormonally within us that can also contribute to burnout? Or are we thinking that we're going through perimenopause when actually we're going through burnout instead?
Mm. So if we go back to that relationship between demand and capacity, I think perimenopause and actually any hormonal transition in women is when the margin between demand and capacity is smaller and there's less room for error. Because in the case of perimenopause, what has been happening is that our hormones or sex hormones have been kind of sustaining us throughout, our reproductive years. And what I mean by that when I say sustain is that they provide, I believe, an extra buffer to stress because they do all these wonderful things for us. They make our metabolism be, stronger. So we're more insulin sensitive. We can eat more things and we don't really feel the effects of that. But when these hormones start to kind of ebb and flow, and the other hormones, I was talking about estrogen in that case, but progesterone, which is kind of our calming hormone, when that tends to go, our sleep becomes, difficult. We are more anxious. We feel more on edge. Our moods really shift. So those hormones in perimenopause will be kind of ebbing and flowing, but in a more erratic way. So we kind of lose that hormonal coordination. And then, so that kind of going up and down too abruptly is creating another stressor to the system, basically. So that capacity becomes, more loaded. So we need to be more intentional about building up our resources and also making sure that we're not getting distracted by the perimenopausal label. It's something that I'm very passionate about because a lot of us just kind of want the label on our foreheads and then we're like, okay, this explains why I'm feeling like this. But actually, if you just kind of leave it at that, you are missing a massive opportunity. Because what I explained at the beginning is that when these sex hormones start to exit, basically they're revealing what's happening under the hood for us. And so a lot of perimenopausal symptoms actually can be tied to things like nutrient deficiencies, and women accumulate nutrient deficiencies throughout their lives. And most women, by the time they arrive at perimenopause, are deficient on things like magnesium, all of the Bs, omegas, D, iron is another big one, right? And so all of those just nutrient deficiencies on their own can create things like mood swings, night sweats, hair loss, a lot of the things that are associated with perimenopause. So when we get distracted by the label, we're forgetting about what's really happening for this person. And so we need to just focus on correcting those things instead of worrying so much about the label, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. And I think this conversation specifically is going to be so helpful for reflexologists, but also how they treat clients.
Mm.
Because I hear it all the time. "Oh, I'm in perimenopause. Oh, it's just perimenopausal symptoms." And I think that it's great that we're so much more aware of perimenopause, but I also don't want people to lie back and just accept a load of symptoms that make them feel
Mm.
rubbish
Yep.
and call it perimenopause when, as you say, we can be looking under the hood and actually in your words, kind of creating the healthy, rich terrain for a great menopause and beyond.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think it's a really important conversation to have. And I think it's also really important to have in this podcast because perimenopause symptoms are very similar from what I've heard you say before to burnout symptoms. And so sometimes we can think, oh, it's just perimenopause, it's just my lot in life, rather than being able to do something about it.
That's it. Because it is another stressor to the system. So to me, I feel like the label is distracting us. And so we need to look at it like a capacity breach issue. And so we have to ask ourselves if, we're looking at an iceberg and above it is the what is going on. So that is perimenopause. Beneath it are, all of these things that can be having thyroid imbalances, autoimmunity, and we forget that that's what's actually driving the systems. It's an overwhelm of those biological systems that are showing up as symptoms up there. And burnouts doesn't just come out of the blue. It's kind of been ticking along quietly in the background, and then suddenly we have symptoms that are diagnosable or above the surface. And so let's kind of, yeah, we can say, okay, you could be perimenopausal, but why don't we look at everything else that's happening? We should do a thorough blood work and just see how those basic vitamins and minerals that we need, how is that? How's your blood sugar regulation? What about lipids? Are you sleeping well? All of those things that can be changed with nutrition and lifestyle. And I think that's a much more empowering conversation. And it's also one that's going to help improve that terrain for later life, because we will all go through perimenopause and we will all have different experiences of perimenopause, which also makes me wonder why, right? I think that kind of makes the point that in someone whose biological systems might be more overwhelmed, you'll have more perimenopausal symptoms. That's kind of what you see above the surface. Someone who's got, a good movement routine, good blood sugar regulation, has good nutrient sufficiency, you might see some changes, perhaps, a little kind of lack of resilience, just feeling like, my workouts leave me a little bit more tired, so I'm going to take more rest. And yes, I'm waking up, at 5 a.m., but overall, I'm sleeping okay. And so there are some people who transition perimenopause with very little symptoms. Strongly believe that how overwhelmed your systems are, your biological systems are before you arrive there is going to decide basically what kind of transition you'll have.
I think people also say that perimenopause can start from 36 years old. I mean, we're in perimenopause for a long time, ladies.
We are.
Rather than just allowing it and tolerating it, to go back to that word,
Mm,
let's start to think about what's going on so we can kind of live a really good life and give to our clients really well with full boundaries and with our cup full, and also understand what our clients are doing.
mm.
Just two more questions really for you, Gabby, because I really could talk to you about this forever because I feel so passionately about it. Are there any mindset shifts that you've seen have made the biggest difference to people moving from burnout to balanced thriving?
Hmm. I think what you said just now is really important. Like it really does start with you. Like, when you're flying with children, and they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first, you have to be able to resource yourself first before you help others. So as practitioners, we do need to ask ourselves, am I resourced today to show up in the way that I want to? And I've had to cancel, appointments before if I haven't like slept well, if I feel like I'm not showing up as my best self. So I think it's, if you want to show up as a practitioner that you want to be, you need to invest, and it doesn't need to be expensive. Perhaps, just a general panel from the GP can be enough, right? And allowing enough time sort of in between sessions to do a small breath resets can be enough. So the mindset reframe there is, I want to show up like the best person. We are, I think a lot of us healers are very lucky because we are living on purpose, because we are doing what we love. And so I ask myself a lot as I've gotten busier with my business, how do I keep showing up with the same love that got me here in the first place? Because when I start to feel drained, overwhelmed, impatient, those are signs that I'm on that burnout spectrum again, because I've kind of done all the work and I know myself really well. So I take a step back and I just deliberately block my calendar as much as I can just to say, okay, I'm not doing this. I'm also a mom. So when my kids are home, I don't work because luckily I can do that, but also, I could not do that because I love working with people, but I just want to be the best mom. So it's really knowing what you want to get out of life. You might have to do some values work around what really is meaningful to you and then do more of that. One cool exercise that I do and I tell my clients to do when they feel a bit like, I don't know what I need in life. It's before you go to bed, when the brain is kind of primed to kind of finally rest. Ask yourself, what was one meaningful thing you did today? Because what that's doing, besides kind of making you feel like you're living more on purpose, so you're going to feel better about yourself and perhaps grateful, is that it's training the brain to seek more of that the following day. Because the brain is just, we are the masters. We think the brain is in charge, but we need to learn how to control it better. And so when you go to bed thinking about that, the next day you're going to wake up seeking more of that. And so, yeah, I think we need to kind of stop and assign more meaning to what's already happening that's good in our lives so that we can kind of show up better resourced and do more of the things that make us show up better resourced.
And I say quite a lot to people, like, it's simple, but it's not easy. So what you've said is relatively simple, thinking about all the meaningful things we've done in a day. But can I ask you, dear listener, like, have you actually done that in the last month?
Hmm.
As you said, our brain is biased towards the negative. So we'll spend a lot of time going, oh, but I wish I'd spoken to the client differently, or I wish I treated them slightly differently. But actually sitting down in the evening and thinking about what's meaningful in your life or what's gone really well is another small shift that can make a massive difference
Yeah,
for
and it
people.
compounds. We were speaking about when you were saying how can small habits change your life? It's because they compound, like compound interest. So you won't see they're not a magic pill, so you're not going to see the differences, you know, straight away, but over time they do. And I actually see this a lot in people who are doing gluten elimination in particular, if they have food sensitivities, they expect that the moment they take gluten out, they're going to feel better. And then they're really disappointed when they don't. And I'm like, just stick with it. Let's stick with it. Let the immune system calm down. And then when they reintroduce it, their immune system goes haywire again. And they're like, oh, I can't believe I was feeling that bad. And that just shows you how the body adapts to make you put up with stuff, right? And only when you distance yourself from those situations are you kind of able to see, my God, is that how I lived my life before?
Love that because again, I love on this podcast that everyone I've recorded so far, there's been really tangible, small, practical things that people can take away from it. So, from what I've got from it, it's thinking about our morning routine, taking a step back and actually thinking, what am I tolerating? How am I feeling in myself? And is this how I want to feel? Because there's a there's like a difference between, normal and optimal. It's making sure that we are fully understanding who we are and what we need because we're all individuals. We might need something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gabby, thank you. I could talk to you forever, but I feel like this is going to really help reflexologist practitioners to really understand themselves because we spend so much time trying to understand others, but actually to understand ourselves and what works for us and the small changes that we can make to really thrive, not just survive. So, Gabby, thank you so much for coming, and I'd love to see you again on the podcast.
You're welcome. Always an honor to speak to you.